Theoretically, this is working. Hello, am I on? Hello. Okay, I think this is working. Okay, I think this is working. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Tristan, Cal, glad you guys could make it. So, why are we covering this is a great question. And the honest answer is mostly because what if Altist shows up? And we're going to be covering him more extensively later in video essay format. But I just kind of wanted to watch this, and I wanted to contrast how Gonzalo Lira treats him versus how he treated Laserpig in Destiny. So let's get started.
Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the...
I noticed we don't have the preamble right away, the good 5-minute preamble that happened last time where he decided to explain his current troubles at the SBU.
The RoundTable, episode number 41. I'm joined here by Jackson Hinkle and What If Alt History. And I assure you, viewers, today will not be a shit show like the last episode. And it's just going to be back to the old, same old of just regular casual conversations between myself and my two esteemed guests. First of all, I've got my
Esteemed is not the word I would use.
returning usual suspect, Jackson Hinkle. Jackson, how's it going? Good to see you, my man.
Good. I'm surprised you didn't have like a normal casual conversation with Destiny. That wasn't like a normal conversation with that guy.
No, I didn't. Okay. It was shocker. Shocker. It's that, I wasn't interested in talking about cuckoldry. And so, there's not much to talk about.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, it's an inside joke. And poor Rudyard, he's like, what the hell did I do?
The status of Destiny's marriage, I don't think it's really something you can equivocate to cuckoldry. At least not without not understanding the particular relationship dynamics in play.
I've talked to Destiny too. I've been
on a podcast.
Yeah. He's been on a big red pill, like bent for the last couple months.
Yeah, I don't trust that guy as far as I can throw him.
I had a good conversation with him.
Kind of like a midget, so maybe I can throw him pretty far. But anyway, let me introduce my guest. This is Rudyard Lynch, who runs the What If Alt History, which is a fantastic channel. The link is in the description below, and of course, Jackson's channel. I've mentioned it before. It's also fantastic. Rudyard's channel is just a history, philosophy, and I'm just totally addicted. If you were like a heroin dealer, he'd make a lot of money. So yeah, so you just be careful because his videos are just addictive.
Jackson Hinkle is really a right-wing pundit and commentator who I think is most notable for every once in a while showing up on Tucker Carlson. Rudyard goes by What If Altist on YouTube. He runs a theoretically alternate history channel. It's not really an alternate history channel so much as it is a place where he prognosticates about whatever comes out of his mouth. He is horrible at history and not particularly good at any of the other things he pretends to be good at.
you're going to blow the whole day just watching them, because there really are. I mean, I'm not blowing sunshine up your ass, man. I mean, I'm really glad that you're here, because I get so much enjoyment out of those videos, because even when I really, really disagree with what you think is going to happen in a given situation, it's always food for thought. And I personally am very speculative, and that's what I enjoy about your channel, because like in the title, what if alt history, and you speculate. And so tell me how you hit upon that first. I mean, like so that people know where you're coming from. I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. So I've been doing the channel for 8 years. I'm 21 right now, and I started at my 13th birthday, mostly out of just boredom. And I did it because I read this this science fiction series about alternate history, which is what I did for the first 7 or so years of my channel, or 6 or something. And alternate history is like, what if the Nazis won World War II? What if the South won the Civil War? And from that book series, I started going on the online alternate history community, and I just didn't like a lot of it. And I thought, if people are doing this, why don't I do my own version? And so first 6 years of my channel, just made videos like, what if the Nazis won World War II? What if the Neanderthals survived? And then after that, I pivoted into the content I currently do now, which the best way to summarize would be looking at the patterns for the rise and fall of civilizations, and then using that to predict the future. And I did that just because all the skills I had gotten for making those alternate histories to work applied to the actual world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is,
Okay, so the what if altist video that I'm in question looking at is his who will win the second American Civil War video. He presents in it a case for a second Civil War that is not based upon any subset of reality at all whatsoever. This is going to be a nightmare. Let's go.
I got into alternate history really like in the late 90s. I recall that they started talking about counterfactual history. And I thought it was an incredibly useful tool to sort of like focus in on what was the pivotal issue of a specific historical epoch, you know? I mean, because you have to like focus on yourself, you know, what really was the pivotal moment that if you changed it, the whole thing would have gone in a different direction. I mean, if one soldier, or just random soldier, survives or dies, not much is going to change. But there was, I forget the incident, the battle that Alexander the Great, when he was starting out, basically, he was almost killed in a battle, and one of his bodyguards threw his own body on top of it.
Battle of Issus.
Well, you'd probably know that, because I can't confirm or deny, because I can't recall offhand. But yeah, and I thought to myself, yeah, this trivial moment could have spun everything in a completely different direction insofar as Western history is concerned. And, you know, I found that really fascinating and a very useful tool to think about what really matters and what doesn't. And also what I noticed is that because of counterfactual history, you started realizing that a lot of the philosophizing about history was kind of bullshitty, because you realized how much of history is just chance, of just things going, you know, one way or the other, and hinging on such small things. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I'd agree.
History is contingent, which means that events rest upon one another. Something has to happen, and it causes another thing to happen. Calling it simple chance is completely ignoring what's actually happening. So this particular story about Alexander's bodyguard, I mean, we're talking over 2,000, nearly 3,000 years ago. It's not like it's a story, it's a legend, it's passed down. There's no real guarantee that that's what it is. Counterfactual history is an exercise. It's a fun way to get into some stuff, but it's not necessarily illuminating. The Soviets are envious of the red flag this guy's putting out. Oh, it's much worse than that.
Agree. I'd say it's like, you know, in statistical sets, you have.
We won World War II because Xander decided to swap a bad chair out of a conference hall. I think we're making a joke. Are we making a joke in time?
A smaller, there's different ranges where, let's say, 70% of the chances are in a certain range, and then you smaller, further out shots. And I think history is like that, where it can change, but it also has statistically wants to go certain ways more. Where, for example, Britain ended up beating France, but there are a couple battles like Trafalgar or in the War of Spanish Succession where the French could have beaten the British, and then we'd be writing all the histories about why the French system.
I will have to ask you about that probably next time I show up in your after show. Because I don't think I've ever heard that story.
Was inherently so much better than the British system.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think in most worlds, the North would have beaten the South in the Civil War just because the North had so much more industry and people and all that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Jackson, what do you think?
Well, one thing that I discuss a lot on my show, and it kind of relates to what you're saying, and I debate quite a bit, is Canada versus the United States, and in London using Canada as a pawn against the United States. And it kind of, when you talk about the French and the British, I reminds me of that conversation. And also, you know, thinking about the future and like what I personally think that eventually Canada is going to become a part of the United States. And
I have a video on that.
Really? What do you think? Yeah. Go, please continue, Jackson. Why do you think that Canada's going to become?
Well, I mean, like if there's ever to be a true revolution in America, where like like a populist uprising to some degree, the British are obviously, City of London will try to use Canada again as a proxy against the United States. And I think that, I mean, like you have the War of 1812, but the naval war already showed that we were far superior at the time. But I think now it would just be a steamroll if we wanted to take Canada. It would just be quite easy. But I don't know, Rudyard.
I mean, these things are complicated. So as of now, the U.S. really doesn't have a reason to take Canada because they're our ally, and so we can get whatever we want out of Canada when we want to because we're so close. And I mean, the reason I posit the U.S. and Canada will join is just because most of the time when you don't have a real strong geographic or cultural.
The wobbly chair, and he took a shot at the mayor, or took a shot at the president and hit the mayor, right? I think, is that where you're getting at in time? He took a shot at FDR, excuse me, rather. Yeah, this entire conversation is completely irrelevant to any real philosophizing or history or any kind of analysis. Yes, the United States is allied with Canada, but alliances are mutual relationships. So Canada gains something from that, and we gain something from that as well. Maybe we don't necessarily give them everything. There are points of contention between the United States and Canada about trade, especially during the Trump years. There was Trump started a trade war with Canada.
Reason for a border, the border is going to get erased. And for the U.S. and Canada, the states opposing each other often have more in common than other states in their same countries. And Canada and the U.S. are so similar that if you just roll the historical dice enough, you're going to end up with them unifying. And the reason
that's not how history works. Canada has a very distinct culture and a very distinct political system, and it has an entire history. It's not just America's hat.
Posit in my video is Eastern Canada is going to have aging that's really hard over the next couple of decades, and they're going to age like a European country, while Western Canada is going to stay a lot younger and more in line with the U.S. And so what you'll end up seeing is that Western Canada funnels more resources and money to Eastern Canada in order to support it. And then Western Canada is going to think at a certain point, why don't we just join America, which is our biggest oil market and grain market anyway?
Okay, so you're
Yep.
thinking that's going to be purely from a pragmatic point of view.
I mean, like we all know what's going on in Canada right now, and I mean, ideologies change over decades. Like the politics of 1970 is very different from the politics of now, and 1950 even more. But I mean, we're all seeing what. I mean, we've all seen what the Trudeau administration's been up to, and if they can keep that sort of thing up, I don't think that they could keep the area outside of their core constituency in Quebec and Ontario that loyal.
No. And it seems like they're trying to, I mean, you talk about Freeland maybe being at the head of NATO. We'll see what happens there, replacing Stoltenberg, and the Canadians with their potential for supplying Europe with, power or energy in the near future, depending on what Europe decides to do without Russian oil and gas. But I don't know. It seems like that wing of politics in Canada has kind of entrenched itself in the establishment. I don't really see it changing that quickly, despite what the sentiment on the ground is.
Yeah, because I think that what has happened in the collective West, let's call it, it's the centralization of power and a desire to keep the status quo above everything else, irrespective of how necessary it might be to change the status quo. There is frankly, the democratic mechanisms in the West no longer work. And so the legitimate grievances of the people are not being confronted and dealt with in a way that could be beneficial to the country as a whole. It's sort of like you have this, I think of it as a ziggurat. It's like stepped pyramid where you have the ziggurat is sort of like floating above the country. And this leadership class on the ziggurat, they climb this thing to the tippity top.
Is he intentionally invoking Adam Weishaupt and Illuminati imagery here, or is that just a thing he's doing for fun?
Right? But they're completely detached from the nation that they're supposed to be ruling over. And that's the feeling I get in Washington, in Ottawa, that they have no interest whatsoever of doing anything major, any changes. They want to keep on going in this regime, frankly, to exploit the people as opposed to governing for the benefit of the people. That's how I currently see it in the West. And I think it's a trend that's been going on since at least the Clinton administration. You could argue that went before, but I'm sorry, Roger, go ahead.
This is something I think a lot about, and it's something that James Burnham wrote about, and a lot of the best historians around World War II, and it's called the Managerial Revolution. And in the rise and fall of civilizations, once civilizations become more decadent, they entrench an ideologically motivated ruling class that's not attached to the actual physical world. In China, it was the bureaucrats, and Islam, and India, the priests, and for us, it's the managers. And they use like some lukewarm form of social liberalism as their religion. And this is something that authors talked about a lot 80 years ago, that this managerial class is trying to take over the West and install itself in every single aspect of society. And this is something I say in my videos, where if you look at the social policies that dominant social liberalism pushes, it's basically to give college-educated people as much power and jobs as possible. And liberalism went from giving people individual freedom, market freedom, all that stuff, to basically just being loathing of their own societies that they want to socially engineer out of. And like, I agree with both of your points, where they're not really representative of their societies because they hate their societies and they want to change them 180 degrees.
Yeah. They really do hate it.
We have to define who the West is, because that's a pretty big topic. And I would also ask Gonzalo where he thinks that's different. Class stratification exists everywhere. It is not a particular function of ideology as much as it is a particular function of the force of economics acting throughout history. Some people are going to have more power and not necessarily have the same perspective or concerns as people who don't have as much power or money. No, and that's precisely the point, Tristan, is if you get right down to it, a whole lot of the grievances that the right and the left both have stem from the same things, but the difference and the prescriptions that come out of those things are all about, like, the right just kind of misses the mark. Like,
and they certainly don't understand it. But what I find most disturbing is that they don't understand that the source of their power is the people that they are lording over and that they are exploiting. Because, I mean, really, I think that we can all agree that at this point, I mean, I know, Rudyard, you're an avowed conservative, so am I, and Jackson is an avowed lefty. But we're all, well, okay. But we're
conservative
all
communist.
Conservative communist, okay.
What political figure would you attach to that ideology? I'm curious.
Stalin.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fair. I just finished a Mao biography, and I would have put like Stalin as a conservative communist.
But getting back to that point, I fully agree with you guys. And the number one like example that comes to mind with that professional managerial class and how they're kind of like shooting themselves in the foot as a class was something that like happened down the street from where I live. I live in LA, and it was the Dave. Okay, I'm in downtown, but it was the Dave Chappelle protests with the Netflix workers. Jesus. And I remember when that was going on, they went out there, you had like you had, I don't even know what those people are. It's like they're going out and they're doing their protests about the transgenderism. And like everyone on Twitter was saying like, this is the fundamental like question of our time and whatnot. And, like trans rights and all this stuff. But it's like, these people are not working class, and these people are not, it's not what, this is not like a life or death situation. It's not whether or not your energy bills are going to be paid this month or whether your water is clean enough to drink. And that caused such like okay.
Whether or not my water is clean enough to drink is by and large administered by that so-called managerial class. You have the EPA, you have the Clean Water Act. All of these things require a bureaucracy to maintain and enforce, because otherwise they would not occur.
Shit show on Twitter, but it's the truth. I mean, these people are like PMC, they're managers, and this is not a life or death situation, but the media, the elites, this class is trying to make these non-issues, these social questions into like
trans. This gets into the kidology thing that President Sunday and Demon Mama and Lucy and everyone else was covering. I don't have the wherewithal to go through kidology again. It's just horrible. These are not small issues. You can't reduce these things for people. Like, for some trans people, transphobia is a life or death issue. They are being targeted, killed, rights are being taken away from them. They're not small issues. You can't reduce it to that.
Like the only thing that we can ever talk about or focus on.
Well, hang on a second. I have a notion of this that I've given it quite a bit of thought, to tell you the truth, and let me expound on it a little bit, and let me try your patience, quite frankly. My thinking is that the ziggurat class, right, with this subsidized educational system, which is subsidized by way of loans, right, and creates this debt burden on the students, but they're all convinced that this is the way to rise in society. What it has managed to do is that by using this educational system, it's managed to co-opt the disenfranchised, intellectually capable perhaps, but not particularly ambitious or hardworking people, and direct what would have been their resentment towards the pinnacle of the ziggurat, direct it downward towards the people. Because, like, for instance, the trans thing.
Like, that's a mechanism, but it's not a mechanism that's suggested by higher education. More to the point, it's not a mechanism that's suggested by people who have received some level of higher education. Like, I know very few people who have gone from, oh, I can't pay my student loans, to those immigrants.
I mean, you talk to any working class person, and they're going to say, this is bullshit. This is insane, right?
When have you talked to a working class person if you've been hiding in an apartment in Kharkiv for 8 months?
But the leadership class at the top, I mean, at the top of the pyramid, they push this nonsense, and the lower echelons of the ziggurat, rather than be resentful of the top, because of their lack of opportunities. Because you got guys who've got $150,000 worth of student loans, and they're slinging lattes at the Starbucks, right? And they're never going to have any kind of opportunities to rise up, right? And so rather than, it's basically co-opting their resentment and aiming it downward as opposed to upward, and demonizing the white working class, which is the majority of the American population, demonizing them and not demonizing the tippity top. The tippity top is, that's what I mean, the lower layer.
Okay, you're describing a process, but you're just putting words into the world. You're not actually putting anything into those words. There's nothing here.
Of this ziggurat. The way to climb into it is by way of this overpriced, ridiculous education that makes absolutely no sense. It's pointless. It's not an education, really. It's just credentialism. But
Did you guys both go to college?
I went for a semester, then dropped out.
Oh, I so wanted to find that out. That explains so much. Well, they're not talking about capitalism. They're very comfortable with the concept of capitalism. What if Autist has like close to 500,000 subscribers? He gets sponsorship deals. He's very comfortable with capitalism. What he's selling is a completely different shtick. He's also incredibly comfortable with capitalism. He's been doing this shtick for a very long time.
Smart man. I did the 4 years, man. But I was lucky because I made money writing in Hollywood, so I could pay off the debt like, I don't know, 18 months after I got out.
Sorry for interrupting. I was just curious.
No. What about you? Did you go to college?
No, I didn't.
You didn't miss much, although a lot of partying. That was the good thing. Yeah.
When I went, there wasn't. I went during COVID, and it really collapsed. And a lot of my
You wouldn't be invited to the parties anyway.
friends who are my age, apparently, like college social life is basically dead even before COVID.
Yeah. Relating back to that conversation though about like how the true working class don't support these things, that's always what the point that Jimmy Dore makes. The YouTube commentator comedian Jimmy Dore, he says like, he said, my father was a bricklayer, we were in unions our whole or his father was a cop, he was a bricklayer, we were in unions our whole lives and stuff. And if there was ever a time when we were on the union floor and someone got up to go give a speech, and they told all the Trump supporters to get out of the room, and they told all of the unionizers who are, anti-trans ideology to get out of the room, and then tell everyone that you're going to organize for a common good, they would have laughed in your face, because it's not about these like woke issues. No one cares about that. Yeah, and they wanted to stop being forced upon them.
Yeah, but you see my point of the leadership class using these woke ideology bullshit.
Who in the leadership class is doing that? Like, who? I suspect that trans people would want some more attention to be paid by leaders in Washington to trans issues. Maybe I'm wrong. We can ask later. But I would imagine that they would want those things to be paid attention to at all. You're equating social media movements to leadership class, which is probably on purpose.
To geld essentially any kind of organized resistance from disenfranchised elites. Because Roger, correct me if I'm wrong, every revolution comes from disenfranchised elites, right?
Okay. So you're suppressing the working class in order to keep the elites from revolting. Just putting that out into the world and phrasing it that way because it's stupid.
Right? Yeah, you're entirely correct. The most dangerous social class are basically unemployed liberal arts majors. And you look at the Russian Revolution, that social class, French Revolution, that social class, the anti-colonialism and African.
The Russian Revolution was a mass set of systems. It was precipitated principally by working class people. The French Revolution was precipitated almost entirely by the third estate with some participation from the second and first. None of that's actually correct. Like, the only way you could think that is if you're taking a concept of class and applying it to a modern conception of class in your society and applying it to a society at those times.
Countries, that social class. And like literally, I was reading a journalist, 1950s Africa, and he was going to these British colonial officials, and he said, "Why are you teaching Africans about these liberal arts subjects if you know they can never get a job about it and they'll immediately become nationalists?" And the Brits said, "Education is a good in of itself." And then the journalist said, "You're a better man than I."
Yeah, but I think that the current leadership on the ziggurat today in North America and the West, they realize this, and they are not better men. They are teaching bullshit of resentment, but aimed downward. I mean, Roger, would you agree that that resentment is aimed downward?
It reminds me of two different things. The first is Saul Alinsky, who I don't know if you two have heard of, but he was a big left-wing writer of like he was actually a labor union organizer. And his whole strategy was how to deal with and control bourgeois capitalist society. And I think he wrote a fabulous book where basically you push social norms and the society's reasonableness as far as you can using a symbolic issue. And that's what they're doing with social justice, where they pick something like trans people, where America has more Salvadorian Americans than trans Americans. And
much more.
Yeah, exactly. And so trans people are a tiny group, but these people want to deconstruct gender, which is the most primal institution in human nature. It existed.
It's not. Sitting on this continent were societies that had conceptions of gender outside of man and woman. Man does X, woman does Y. It simply is not primal. It has to be developed and designed and enforced.
For billions or hundreds of millions of years, and for the cost of a group that's 0.0 whatever percent of the population. Yeah, and true. They're pushing this symbolic issue. They'll push symbolic issues for like other bullshit I don't care about, like coffee cup, like this, like Happy Christmas.
Gas stoves are evil.
Some insane bullshit like that, so that they can push a symbolic issue that doesn't matter to get their followers riled up, and the society will just think this doesn't matter and give them another concession for salami slicing. And you're totally right. Where
you have not properly established what's happening. People are advancing an issue like gas stoves, which they aren't really. A report came out which conservatives glomped onto, and this is what conservatives did, glomped onto about gas stoves. Personally, electric stoves are better. But, you know, you are literally being fed a line, accepting that line, and then regurgitating it as something that is happening to you. The people who are doing this to you are your people. It's the right-wing media infrastructure that does this to you, specifically to get you to sit here in your silly red shirt and your silly glasses and say these stupid things.
Where it's the ziggurat is built upon the college educated, and they can ideologically unify by indoctrinating people in college. Once they're indoctrinated, they become.
You didn't attend college. If teachers could indoctrinate people, you think they would be bothering to indoctrinate them to a social order? No, they'd be bothering to indoctrinate them to turn in their goddamn homework.
Cadres for them to do whatever they'd like with. And the left in America, and also the managerial elite, is college educated across the West, and their resistance is largely people who are not like that. And I don't know what the coalitions are in Europe, but in America, it's an alliance of religion, the military, and business. And I mean, I really liked your point, Jackson, because I grew up in Pennsylvania in an area that is really deindustrialized. And I saw firsthand how it switched like 5 points to the right with Trump, because you had Italians and Poles who voted Democrat for decades because they thought it was the party of the unions. And then the managerial class that under communism used the workers as a way to gain power just totally switched the workers out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't understand what was happening there. Did you just suggest that Pennsylvania is a communist state? Oh my God, we're only 22 minutes into this. There's 2 hours left. Let's go.
And let me ask you something, Roger. Do you think that there is a real chance of some sort of leadership cadre that is in true opposition to the ziggurat? Because I don't really see one being.
I think so, actually. It's from the internet.
Really?
Because I look at the young people I think could provide leadership against this. And it's people who organize through the internet. And I think it reminds me a lot of there are cycles to civilization. So this is kind of woo-woo, but it's something I studied a lot, where different civilizations have life cycles that are pretty similar. And we're closest to the period of the fall of the Roman Republic. And I kind of, and at the time there was a lot of political polarization. And I kind of see the social class that'll form the resistance against the managerial group being like an alliance of people who can form through the internet, because in the pre-internet world, the university was the only real way to organize people in a broad group, because you bring them together when they're young, you have them like party together, builds group cohesion, have them study similar subjects, get similar ideology, they network, they go out into the world, and they can coordinate together. Through the internet, you can, this is a great example. After this, we can plan how to destroy the managerial class. But through meeting in this conversation, which only happened online, that's forming the opposing group. And I think it can happen in the English-speaking world, or basically the US and the rest of it by extension. I don't see as much happening in continental Europe, because I just don't think there's enough young people. Like, you go to Europe, you walk around the streets, and like Philadelphia, where I grew up, is a dead city. And then you go to Italy or France, and it's just so much more dead. They don't have enough young people or spirit or belief in anything to really go against the managerial class.
You don't see babies. That's the thing that always struck me. I lived over the last few years. I've lived in.
Women must breed more children in order to overthrow some nebulous managerial class. Yeah, university was the only group you could organize. Yeah, it's not at all true. I mean, they were talking about labor unions 5 minutes ago. There's no set of consistency. Union workers, by and large, are not usually envisioned to be college educated. Sometimes they are. It depends on what union you're talking about. But like a lot of union jobs were blue collar jobs, like jobs that didn't typically require a college education. They're also some of the better paying jobs. They're still some of the better paying jobs in the United States. They're just not, they've been slowly politically ground down by the same people who are paying for Fox News that these guys all probably religiously watch.
And over the last decade, I've lived in Paris for over a year, London for over a year, Amsterdam for over a year, and Germany for almost a year. And you see few babies. That's the thing that always struck me. You know, here in Eastern Europe and Ukraine before
Lira, there's a reason no one will show you their kids.
The conflict, obviously. You'd see pregnant women all the time. You know, you'd see women with strollers, you know, families wandering around with kids. You don't see that in Europe. And it's kind of shocking, you know.
That's an interesting thing because in all of the civilizations, you hit the period where its single ideology seizes power, and then the elite attached to that ideology changes the society so that they can have total power. They regulate business until the countries are poor, which happened all over Asia for thousands of years. They make the military weaker. They shut down any religious opposition. And the current elite we have, it has its strengths, where it's much more humane. It's much more
pseudo-humane, if you ask me.
Yeah, but the thing I'm going to say is that it's much more anti-life and self-hating than the other ideologies I can think of that unify these civilizations. And that's one of the things that makes me think it's not going to work, because
what is the ideology?
Again, like, a quarter of young people don't want to have kids because they're scared of climate change. And, and I'm like, what? But the thing is, like, they legitimately hate life after a certain point, where they don't think having kids is a good idea. They don't think basically any activity goes against climate change. If you're a white person, you're anti-racial. It's because the West's great advantage over other civilizations is our ability to self-reflect. And that's why we've been able to have technological and social progress where most societies just rely upon tradition and the tradition gets old. But the problem with being self-reflective is we push it too far.
Yeah, and well, the other thing is you talk about like this anti-life, anti-human ideology. It is rooted in this like Malthusian doctrine that has again really taken hold in a lot of Western Europe. And you can see like even like I mean like I cover the Ukraine war so much, but you can see in the polls even surrounding that issue in particular, and there's obviously geographical and historical reasons probably for the polls looking so different than they do in the United States, but the populace is so much more cucked to whatever the official narrative is about the war in Ukraine and Western Europe, like loads more than it ever was in the United States. In the United States, it's like you look through any single issue, there's always going to be a substantive or a good chunk of people that do.
I'm not accepting as well anything that Rudyard has to say as useful. This is all nonsense.
Stand true to the tradition of America and that sort of Wild West mentality, 1776, and say like, you know,
what? Wild West mentality, 1776.
Screw the Malthusian doctrine. This is not representative of our pro-life agenda. So I think that's why America is in such a unique position right now, despite the fact that the West as a whole is crumbling. America, I do have a lot of hope for.
I think in a lot of cases, this is something Spengler, who is a big historian about this matter, said, is your distance from nature determines how cut off you get from this stuff. And in America, for a lot of the country, nature is omnipresent. Like if you drive across any state in America, you're going to see endless woods, endless desert, endless grasslands. And America is really an empty country. And I kind of split America between the people who are surrounded by nature and.
When did this occur? 28 minutes. Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind when I get to talking about his video on that second American Civil War that he envisions happening. Is he presents a political map as a military map, which is a mistake for a number of reasons. But he illustrates this idea that there's this sea of red that would overwhelm the blue, and he kind of fails to he fails to understand that most of America is empty at this point. This is not a very well populated country. No, they're not remotely, Cal, ideologically consistent, or they don't really have a command of these people. They haven't read them in any meaningful sense. I should have got drinking, but I have surgery tomorrow, so I can't drink.
The land, the people who are surrounded by other people. Because once you get societies to be really urban, people stop caring about the outside world. They care about pleasing other people because they're only surrounded.
%? Does that say? That says 80% of Americans live in urban areas.
By the human context. And urban societies can't replicate. They have trouble waging external war. And in America, we've always had this divide between the coasts that have wanted to ape Europe and then the interior of America that wants to build a new American civilization. And I mean, coming from Pennsylvania, my area of the country was the wealthiest in the world, and then deindustrialization happened and it crashed. I think something similar is going to happen in a lot of America, like the West Coast, where
Who deindustrialized? Why did these factories close? Why did these jobs go away? Because companies chose to take labor and find it elsewhere where they could get it cheaper. They did an end run around the unions because the unions could set terms in the United States. They can't set terms if they have to go overseas where there is no power for unions.
they're just going to lose their predominance and will move to another part of the country.
I think that another problem that is unique to our era.
I wonder what he means by replicate too. Is it like, does the society just reproduce by mitosis? Urban life is predominant on the planet, not just the United States. It has been predominant since, well, basically farming. You see a concentration of cities in the Bronze Age, and then the Bronze Age collapse, a systemic collapse occurs. You get hit by earthquakes and floods, and then that causes internal rebellions and famines happen, and then you get invaded by the sea peoples, and then the system collapses, and it springs up again though. Like civilization has a certain set of cycles to it, but the point of civilization that I think you really want to get to, if you want to get into meta history, is that all of civilization is stronger each time something happens to it. So you have a relatively small number of problems, generally speaking, cause a collapse in the Bronze Age. And each time you have these systems, you have less systemic failure in civilization.
Is the fact starting with the invention of the pill or the dissemination of the pill.
Oh yeah,
and then widespread abortion. I think that and other easy contraceptive measures that really didn't exist or were very limited previously. I think that's one of the things I find really remarkable. You know, you talk to most young women and they have never dealt with a baby. They have no idea what a baby is. To them, it's like an alien, like a little Martian or something. Right? They're scared of it. They think that, you know, if they look at it the wrong way, the baby will break or something, you know? And so that is something that I think that is unique to this era. And I think it plays into the
contraceptives contraception and abortion have been being practiced for thousands of years.
life. Basically, we're talking about nihilism. I think that it plays into it very much because there's
the desire not to have children is not nihilistic.
Something else too that I was struck with. I remember in college with different people that I talk. You speak to so many people and they tell you about their personal lives because they're disconnected from their hometown and they've arrived on campus and they're trying to forge new connections with people, right? And so you hear all kinds of stories, and you know most of them say, "Oh yeah, my mom had an abortion before me or after me, or several abortions." And there's this weird notion that their own lives are kind of precarious, perhaps not on an articulate, conscious level, but the sense that, you know, I could have been aborted too, you know? I'm not really making a specific point, but I just want to draw attention to that aspect
You've
of
never
our
had that
current
conversation
society,
in your life,
which is sui generis. I can't think of any other society that had such a thing, except actually the late Roman Empire, when they did have effective. They didn't use abortion. I mean, it wasn't a procedure. It was substances, right? I'm sorry. What did you say?
No, I mean the Romans would just literally let the baby die in the street.
No. Oh my God. No. First of all, no. Egypt, ancient Egypt, thousands of generations before Rome, ancient Egypt had abortion, understanding of how to induce an abortion.
In the classical world, if you didn't want the kid, you just leave it in the gorge and hope a slave picks it up. The next video I'm making that I got a lot of new furniture, so my whole schedule is delayed. But the video I finished is Why is Modern Dating Broken? And one of the I really agree with you on the pill, and I always wonder if we're gonna make the pill illegal as a society. And
I
a
think we
big
should.
thing,
Oh my God. Just out of curiosity. Is that video finished?
I think we should.
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm on my whole research trip, and I'll come back to you in a year with, and I might agree with you. But I mean, the thing
I'm sure glad that 2 white men have decided that all women everywhere shouldn't have access to medicine.
is, with society, we gave women a lot of allowances because the cost of bearing children for them is just so insanely high, where they have to have the kid for a year and then they have to raise it for the next 20 years. And once you remove children and like sexual responsibility, it kind of untethers a lot of women from the major biological responsibility. And so it just totally rechanges the structure of society.
You heard it here first, folks. Women are only supposed to have kids. They can't have any other purpose.
And it's, yeah, and I think the social effects of the pill are insane, and
I'm sorry?
It untethers sex from
responsibility.
It makes sex separate from responsibility, from family, from society, from the individuals you.
Stop this right now. Oh my God. Sex is only a responsibility if you attach children to it for a woman. A man bears no responsibility in any real sense for the sex. You're putting all of that on women. I don't understand how you can't see how horribly misogynistic this is.
Do it with, and
Yeah,
I mean, there's a really
well. What also happens with when you have the pill, easy contraceptive, and most women are on basically a get out of free jail card insofar as the consequences of sexual activity. And so, of course, what will happen is that, see, if there are no consequences to something that feels good, because definitionally sex feels good, I mean, or else people wouldn't fuck now, would they? You know, I mean, then it becomes a sexual free-for-all. And then you get what we have today, which I think is a catastrophe, because you have, 20% of the men get 80% of the women, basically.
We're doing hypergamy. We're doing hypergamy, everyone. Oh, it's Coach Red Pill is in rare form. Oh, you want uppies? You want uppies? Uppies! Rah. Uppies! Yeah, you're a good boy. We are doing the full Red Pill adventure.
80% of the men are left with the scraps if they're lucky. And one could argue that roughly 40% of men
women are scraps
never get any sex at all.
Yeah.
And so those men become completely demotivated insofar as trying to build anything, because, see, having kids is the building block for most guys. I mean, most guys who knocked up their girlfriend will tell you, once I knew that the kid was coming, we were going to have the kid. Holy shit, it was like a light switch went off. And I started becoming harder working, more disciplined, just much more serious about life. But when you have a disenfranchised population of men who are never going to have that, I mean, they kind of like know that they're never going to have that, then there's no incentive. Then you have the hikikomori, I think that they're called in Japan.
The vegetable man.
You have the incels who play video games all day and just fritter away their lives on fucking Marvel comic book movies and toys, literal toys. The toys are made now for the adults, which is just insane, But I'm getting overheated. But you see my point.
I'm curious also about the.
Sorry. Let me just make this point clear. A society that is not channeling the young men to be productive is a society that will die. I mean, Jackson, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, even on that point, it's like, you brought up earlier that this anti-human worldview it's nihilism at its core. I think amongst the masses, it's nihilism, but those who are guiding this policy of saying, okay, let's do assisted suicide for anyone who has mental health issues. Let's you
No one
know,
is saying
instill
that. I have never heard
generational
that once.
infertility amongst the masses, obesity, any of these problems, you know, that cause depopulation. I think it's more cynical and targeted. And that's why I use the Malthusian doctrine as the point there, because I do think depopulation is on the agenda. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts
Whose
about this,
agenda?
because this is always something I discuss. If you look at like every great man throughout history, like every true great leader, you know, you could choose, I'd say probably like 75+% of them, and they all had many mistresses or wives, many children and whatnot. And then you look at the greatest women throughout history. Cleopatra is the only one I've ever had people debate me on, and I don't know how many people Cleopatra slept with. I mean, I don't know if anyone really knows that, but well, some people say that, but some historians say not. But I'm like, I wasn't in her bedroom. I don't know. But some people argue only two. So there, you know, there's a debate there. But you know, women historically, it's been the exact opposite. Great women do not sleep around. What do you guys think? I mean, like,
women generally don't sleep around. This period that we're going through is the anomaly. Okay,
I mean,
because women historically don't sleep
see you
around
later,
like
Tristan.
this.
We're
They have
probably
the
not finishing
permission
this all
slip
the
of
way
the pill
through.
to sleep around, and abortion if the pill doesn't work. But this period is the anomaly. Okay, I mean, well, Rudyard, you would know better than any of us.
Yeah, I read a really fascinating book called The Moral Animal by Robert Wright, and it's about how evolutionary biology influences dating life. And for women, just the cost of sex is so high, they really can't afford to sleep around over the pill, because you get knocked up, you have to raise the fucking kid for the next 20 years. Yeah. And there's another interesting book called The Sex and Civilization by J.D. Unwin, where he goes through
it's a book I was going to mention. It's fantastic.
Yeah, he goes through. I wish he was a better writer, though. It's like you're reading a fucking like science notebook.
Well, but that's what he was. He was a real anthropologist. He's fantastic. I mean, Jackson, you got to check him out.
Taken a course in writing, but like he goes through literally every civilization or tribal society in the world, and he analyzes their sexual mores. And the general pattern he finds is that the more sexually repressed a society is, the better developed it is. So if you look at societies where women go around topless, people sleep around, they will be barbarians who don't even have like a legal code, and they can't they have 20% murder rate. And then you'll go a bit higher, and then they have some sexual mores, they'll be a bit more advanced. And then you get like India, China, the Muslim world, like the biggest civilizations of Asia, and they're very sexually repressed, where I mean of the major world civilizations, Europe was the only one that didn't basically keep women at home for their whole lives. And the Europeans had a really good system of balancing sexual repression with more women's rights. But what J.D. Unwin said was basically that the reason sexually repressed societies did better is that it gave men an incentive to work harder, because they knew, okay, if I marry my wife, I know I'm going to have kids with her. I know she'll be a virgin. And so for the men, they basically said, okay, you work hard, your paternity is insured forever. And it also, you're not competing with your bros over the same girl. So it doesn't destroy the male cooperation. I'm also guessing if guys aren't sleeping around more, they're putting their energy more towards conquering other countries or building great works of art and
taking Canada.
Exactly. And so he goes through, once societies become they stop respecting paternity more and they start allowing adultery and all that stuff, their empires fall apart. And he goes to the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the British. And right when they stop respecting marriage is when their civil empires start to fall apart.
Yeah, exactly.
And on a more micro level,
that's a function of the lack of respect for marriage is a function of the wealth of the society. The repressed society with the hardworking men creates plenty. And in that plenty, that's when the marriage bond starts to dissolve. Because if you think about it, what is the marriage bond? It's basically a contract between a man and a woman. And the contract is, the woman promises sexual access and exclusivity in return for the man providing protection, shelter, and resources. And that way,
Oh, what a fault this remind you of?
The man is assured that the woman's child is going to be his child, and so he will work hard. But once
Yeah.
that contract begins to weaken because there are other social aspects of the society that allows a single mother to survive, then that's when things
Okay, so you're essentially arguing right here. Oh, that's probably fair, yes. You're essentially arguing right here that because men don't have control over women, society is collapsing. You misogynistic little prick.
start to fall apart, and subsidy for single mothers is what ultimately, I think, dissolves the marriage union. If there is a government, a state, or a religion, or any other establishment that will support the single mother, then the marriage contract begins to dissolve. That's my thinking at this point. What do you?
Marriage is dissolved for a lot of reasons, but there was a period of time, relatively recently, where Americans were not able to find no-fault divorces. This led to them staying trapped in bad marriages. People who shouldn't have been married, particularly in my grandparents' generation, stayed married. You know who changed that in the United States? Ronald Reagan.
What do you
I
guys
think
think?
it's also probably the pill, and it's
Well,
yeah. Damn, I had a point that I wanted, but fuck, I forgot my point. Someone else go.
I'll throw in there. I was gonna say on like a micro level of looking at these, the degradation of society based upon the how promiscuous women in general are. You look at the relations between man and woman.
Oh, those darn women and their promiscuity. I'm done with this. This is nonsense. Yes, this is absolute nonsense. I'm going to cut it here. There's nothing of value here. Don't watch Gonzalo Lira. Don't watch What a Fault Is. Don't watch Jackson Hinkle. It'll rock your brain. Thanks, folks.